Hello, everybody. It's me, your boy, Sil the DM, bringing you, hopefully the first of, again, regular recordings, from my D&D sessions. And this week we had the Sands of Calimare. This week session was very interesting from, like, a lore and roleplay, perspective, but not too much happened. Um, for the most part, our players were experiencing the rest of their downtime, doing a little shopping here and there, doing a little studying. Um, the notable events that occurred were uh, as sort of flowing along. While studying, Nixandra ended up speaking with Hadel. I think that's her name. I never remember it correctly. But I think I actually have the book right here. I do. Hadel, I was right. Excellent. Freya's wife. Um, she came to Nixandra to try and confirm something about one of the members of the party. Curious about which of the houses Aesier was from. Um, and through this conversation, Nixandra learned how Aarden'vole, Aesir's adopted father, was actually close friends with Freya, and how in the past the two of them had gone on several adventures. Most notably, that Freya mentioned, um, they traveled to steal an artifact um, that belonged to a clan of storm giants that had been taken by a dragon and being protected by frost giants. And how the three of them, Freya, Aarden'vole, and a friend of theirs from that storm giant clan named Croxus, um, did like a big infiltration quest to steal the item back. And how later, uh, Ardaval, Freya, and people who she just referred to as a pair of brothers, ended up stopping a pretty horrible event in Warden, called the Black Flight Ravaging, where a figure used a dragon rod to gain control of the Black Dragon Flight, and very suddenly used it to attack all the other families, um, resulting in a lot of death and destruction and a whole lot of imbalance in the continent of Warden for about 80 years. Um, and through all of this, Nixandra grew more and more sort of uh, hesitant reading about these events, um, as Freya had sort of brought over a book sort of detailing the events of what they did in Warden. Um, and she began to fear that perhaps the rod that her mother had used previously in Durham to gain control of the Red Dragonflight was the same rod in question that had controlled the Black Dragonflight, and was feeling a lot of guilt from it. Um, Eventually, the party reconvened, and she shared this revelation to the party, including Aesier, um, which made Aesier very uncomfortable. Not just that Alexandra seemed to think she was guilty about something that she really had nothing to do with, but the fact that there was just so much about his father that he didn't know. Um, so after excusing himself from the party, and while everyone else talked for a little bit, eventually they all just fell asleep. Um, though Aesir was visited by his father that night, and they spoke for a little while about some of the details of that quest and other things. And during the night, Nixandra ended up waking up a bit earlier than everyone else, um, sort of roused by a sound at the window in the back of the room. And after she stepped out onto the patio, she was joined by Aarden'vole, or this apparition of Aarden'vole that seems to be haunting the players on occasion. Um, and the two of them spoke for a little while, and he clarified that there were only 10 dragon rods, and that each one did something different, but they all did the same thing. The description and the conversation basically detailed a bit about these artifacts, these dragon rods, how they all control dragons, but each of the 10 rods can only control a specific type of dragon. So, he just wanted to clarify for her that the rod that her mother wielded, the one that controlled red dragons, was not the one that controlled the black dragons. Um, it was a bit of an interesting conversation. I think it probably would have went a bit better had Acer's player been able to be there. Um, today's, a lot of today's, the first half of today's session was really cool shit about uh, Aesir's extended adopted family, sort of. Um, but unfortunately, the player wasn't able to be there, and uh, there really was no other time for this part of the story to sort of happen, so it had to happen now, which is regrettable. Um, for the rest of the downtime, I don't believe too much happened that was very interesting. Again, it was just more studying, conversations, chatting. Um, However, on the next day, towards the end of their downtime, Blair and Aesier went back to the keep, to Valhalla, to do their sort of daily check-in with Luther after having spent most of the day shopping for sending stones with Riok. They did eventually find one that was slightly more potable, or not potable, portable. Portable, not potable. They're not eating the sending stone. Something not so giant sized they couldn't fit it into their bag of holding. Um, and when they arrived, Blair, again, because Aesir is sort of in autopilot mode for this session, because I really get uncomfortable having to play someone else's character. I could play hundreds of NPCs, but I know how those NPCs are meant to function, and I know what their personality is intimately. I know what all of their inner thoughts are. It doesn't. It's a lot harder for me to try and do that with someone else's character. So I don't like to roleplay them too extensively. Uh, but when they got there, they noticed that in the throne room, Sokar wasn't alone. He was joined with someone that Blair recognized as Aerthrin, that god-like being that she had spoken to before, who'd helped her with her memories. Um, they spoke briefly, and Sokar looked quite down, like he had been crying. Uh, and Aerthrin and Blair sort of excused themselves to give him some time alone. And Aether used his amethyst to create sort of a bubble of silence around the throne room to give Sokar his privacy. And the two of them made their way upstairs to visit Luther. Um, and it was sort of explained to Blair that a very good friend to Sokar and Aethrin had died. Uh, a man named Sin had died, uh, which was prompting a bit of a depressive episode between the two men, as they had spent a lot of time with Sin apparently in their youth. Um, Blair's not really a history buff, and neither is Aesier, so unfortunately, they didn't really get too much information out of that, other than just being sad that their friend was sad. When Blair went to check in on Luther, um, she noticed that her letters were missing and that the scarf had been moved slightly, uh, and was a little concerned until she noticed that the letters were with Luther. And very slowly he seemed to react to her presence in the room. And a bit of a conversation happened between the two of them. Uh, Aethrin, noticing the mood, excused himself, uh, knowing that he could catch up with Luther later if he really wanted to. It appeared that Luther was beginning to overcome the seals that were restricting his, well, for just his brain activity. basically. Um, but everything was sort of like sloth vision. It was like seeing and hearing and responding to things on a slight lag delay. Um, and they had a pretty decent conversation. Um, and Blair felt a good bit relieved that Luther was moving and fine and seemed happy to see her. But also confused as to why Aethrin was here. Um, and he asked about that, and Blair explained the situation to him, and that seemed to really snap him out of his sloth like state. Like he just sort of pushed through it, um, possibly on adrenaline, um, and said that he needed to be with Sokar. Um, and the three of them returned downstairs. And while Luther and Sokar shared a moment, Aethrin and Blair decided to wait outside. Aethrin moving Blair outside very quickly, sort of just blasting the two of them to the outside, so fast that she didn't really notice what had happened. Um, and the two of them had a bit of a conversation about what was going on, and it was a nice moment, but I don't think anything in the conversation was so groundbreaking. I didn't write down any of it word for word, so I didn't think it was super important, but it definitely showed the two of them just enjoying each other's company. Um, Earlier, though, Sokar had said that they needed to get ready because he was going to push their plans ahead slightly, as he now needs to go attend a funeral. Um, After this, Luther and Blair went back to their apartment and crashed. And for the first time since meeting Luther, Blair actually got to see him sleep um, properly. The next day, the group wanted to head to the hospital to leave off the sending stones, and the rest wanted to visit the tower, I believe. Um, I think that's where they were going. I'm sure Aesier wanted to talk to Freya, and I believe Blair was also looking at trying to get a pair of sending stones made. Um, and as they were crossing the bridge, while the roosters, as they were, people like Luther who wake the whales in the morning, were out performing, um, bringing the whales to the surface, so that the Ethereum they sort of uh, radiate off their bodies can be collected by the giants. It was interrupted when the whales suddenly dispersed, and an explosion occurred in the clouds, the ocean that surrounds the flying island, um, and a skeletal dragon pulled its way up from the depths. And that's where we ended the session. Um, yeah, I'm looking forward to the next session. Should be good. I think we're very close to being off of Laputa. I would not be surprised if we end up being off it pretty early into the next session, which is exciting. I'm very curious to see where the story goes from here. I hope you had fun. If you have any questions, comments, or inquiries, please leave them in the comments below. Have a great day.